Philippines will not surrender any part of its territory or interests in the West Philippine Sea, give up the Kalayaan Island Group.
The Philippines currently occupies 9 features in the Spratly Islands, a region it collectively calls the Kalayaan Island Group in the South China Sea. Out of these 9, 5 lie within the country's 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone, EEZ, while 4 sit beyond it. But here's the key point. According to the Department of Foreign Affairs of the Philippines, the country's sovereignty over these islands doesn't depend on whether they fall inside its EEZ or not. Territorial ownership and maritime rights follow different legal principles. To clear up common misunderstandings, the department emphasized that maritime entitlements come from territory. In other words, if a country legally owns an island or rock that remains above water at high tide, that sovereignty stands regardless of nearby maritime zones. For the Philippines, its sovereignty over the Kalayaan Island Group, administratively tied to Palawan, has long been considered settled. Under Republic Act No. 12,064, which aligns with the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, the maritime areas west of the Philippine archipelago are collectively known as the West Philippine Sea. This includes waters such as the Luzon Sea, the territorial sea surrounding Bajo de Masinloc, and the maritime features of the Kalayaan Island Group. The Philippines bases its claim partly on what happened after Treaty of San Francisco. When Japan renounced its claims to the Spratly Islands after World War II, the treaty did not clearly transfer ownership to another country. As a result, the islands were widely considered terra nullius, territory belonging to no one. So, in 1956, Filipino explorer Thomas Cloma declared ownership over 33 maritime features in the Spratlys, arguing that no state had a valid claim to them at the time. 2 decades later, in 1978, President Ferdinand Marcos issued a decree formally incorporating parts of the Spratlys into Philippine territory. The decree cited 3 legal bases: proximity to the Philippine archipelago, historical ties, the absence or abandonment of other claims. However, when the Philippines updated its baselines in 2009 to comply with UNCLOS, the country adjusted how it defined maritime zones around the Kalayaan Island Group. Instead of treating the islands as a single archipelago, their territorial waters were measured individually from low-water baselines. The Philippines also claims Scarborough Shoal based on historical succession. When Spain ceded the Philippines to the United States in 1898, sovereignty over nearby maritime features, including the shoal, was transferred as well. After the Philippines gained independence, it inherited that title. Meanwhile, China and Taiwan argue that much of the South China Sea constitutes their historic waters. They illustrate this claim using a sweeping U-shaped boundary on maps, commonly known as the 9-dash line, which covers nearly 90% of the sea. The problem? The line's exact coordinates and legal foundation are vague, and many legal experts say it conflicts with UNCLOS. The countries most directly affected include Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, and Brunei. But the dispute has also drawn in outside powers, most notably the United States, which has pushed back against China's maritime ambitions. The roots of today's tensions stretch back to the geopolitical shifts following World War II. China's modern claim originated with the 11-dash line, introduced in 1947 by the nationalist government, led by Chiang Kai-shek of the Kuomintang during the Chinese Civil War. For the nationalists, the map symbolized China's return to regional strength after what many described as a century of humiliation by foreign powers. When the communists led by Mao Zedong won the Civil War and established the People's Republic of China, Beijing adopted those maritime claims, later simplifying the line into the now famous 9-dash line. The Philippines also cites historical cartography. Scarborough Shoal appeared on maps of Philippine waters as early as the 1750s. and it was famously included in the Murillo Velarde map from 1749, where it was labeled Panacot, another name for Bajo de Masinloc. A crucial moment came on July 12, 2016, when an international tribunal under UNCLOS ruled in favor of the Philippines in the South China Sea arbitration. The tribunal unanimously concluded that China's 9-line claim had no legal basis under international law. China rejected the ruling, but it remains a landmark decision in maritime law. To reinforce the ruling domestically, the Philippines passed new legislation in November 2024, the Maritime Zones Act. This law aligns Philippine domestic law with UNCLOS and the 2016 arbitration ruling. It clearly defines the country's internal waters, archipelagic waters, territorial sea, contiguous zone, exclusive economic zone, continental shelf. Its goal is to clarify the geographic extent of the Philippine maritime domain and the legal rights the country can exercise in each zone. The act will also guide the updated administrative map of the Philippines, which will specifically identify areas such as the Kalayaan Island Group, Scarborough Shoal, Macclesfield Bank, the West Philippine Sea, Benham Rise. Under the law, waters within 200 nautical miles west of the Philippine archipelago are officially called the West Philippine Sea, while waters beyond that remain part of the South China Sea. According to the Philippine Foreign Affairs Department, the law helps define waters within the archipelagic baselines, clarify the country's territorial sea and contiguous zone, strengthen governance over marine resources, provide clear guidance on national maritime rights. It also supports other maritime laws aimed at protecting and sustainably managing the Philippines' ocean resources. Now here's an interesting twist. Pag-asa Island, part of the Kalayaan Island Group, sits about 270 nautical miles, around 500 kilometers, from Palawan, beyond the Philippines' 200 nautical mile EEZ. But distance alone doesn't determine sovereignty. Pag-asa has permanent civilian residents and a solid landmass, strengthening the Philippines' claim and maintaining its legal presence there. Under international law, the island generates its own 12 nautical mile territorial sea. The Spratly Islands themselves are not just a few tiny islands. They're a vast network of reefs, shoals, atolls, and small islets scattered across one of the world's most strategically important seas. And as competing historical claims, legal rulings, and geopolitical ambitions collide, these remote features remain at the heart of one of the most complex maritime disputes on Earth. The Spratly Islands sit in a strategic stretch of the South China Sea, north of Malaysia, and roughly halfway between Vietnam and the Philippines. These scattered reefs, shoals, and tiny islands may look insignificant on a map, but they're at the center of one of the most complex territorial disputes in the world. Several countries claim all or parts of them. For the Philippines, the area it administers is known as the Kalayaan Island Group. These features are part of the municipality of Kalayaan, Palawan, located in Palawan, the country's westernmost province facing the South China Sea. But here's an important distinction. The Kalayaan Island Group is not the same as the entire Spratly Islands. The Spratlys include many more reefs and islets, some claimed or occupied by other countries. The Kalayaan Island Group contains more than 130 maritime features, including 7 islands and 2 reefs currently occupied by the Philippines. Altogether, these islands cover only about 290 square kilometers, 112 square miles of land. But the sea surrounding them is enormous. The broader Spratly region spreads across nearly 409,000 square kilometers, 158,000 square miles of ocean. Many of the features aren't even visible above water at high tide. They're submerged reefs or shoals hidden beneath the waves. Among the 12 naturally formed islets in the Spratlys, the largest is Taiping Island, a 90-acre island controlled by Taiwan. In response to growing tensions, the Philippines introduced the Philippine Maritime Zones Act. This law is widely seen as Manila's formal answer to China after Beijing released its 2023 Standard National Map, which included a controversial 10-dash line. That line claims nearly the entire South China Sea as Chinese territory. The problem? That massive claim overlaps with the exclusive economic zones of several nations, including the Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei, Vietnam, and Indonesia. The new Philippine law aims to clearly define the country's maritime boundaries, including the outer limits of its continental shelf beyond 200 nautical miles in the South China Sea. But that's not all. Manila could also pursue separate maritime boundary negotiations with the neighboring countries, potentially bypassing China entirely. There is also the possibility of new international legal actions, especially on issues like environmental damage and marine protection in disputed waters. Surprisingly, one of the most powerful tools in the Philippines' legal battle isn't a warship or a satellite image. It's a 300-year-old map. The Murillo Velarde map, created in 1734, played a crucial role in the Philippines' historic victory in the South China Sea arbitration at the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague. Often called the mother of all Philippine maps, it became a centerpiece of the country's legal argument under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Why was it so important? Because the map clearly showed Scarborough Shoal, labeled at the time as Panacot Shoal, what Filipinos now call Bajo de Masinloc. It also illustrated the Spratly Islands, which were then known as Los Bajos de Paragua. The Philippines' dispute with China centers on the West Philippine Sea, a section of the larger South China Sea. But the significance of the Murillo Velarde map goes beyond legal arguments. It carries a moral and historical weight. Whenever China points to its 9-dash line, first published in 1947, the Philippines points to something even older. A map drawn more than 2 centuries earlier during the reign of Philip V of Spain. This map, an official Spanish government document, depicted the Philippine territory as early as 1734, including the contested shoals. Later treaties, such as the Treaty of Paris and the Treaty of Washington, reinforced those territorial definitions. Numerous other historical maps, often called the siblings of the mother of all Philippine maps, further supported these boundaries, even during the period when the Philippines was under United States administration, the first scientific map of the Philippines. The 1734 map is widely recognized as the first scientific map of the Philippines. It was created by Spanish Jesuit priest Pedro Murillo Velarde, with the help of Filipino collaborators Francisco Suarez and Nicolas de la Cruz Bagay. Beyond its legal importance today, the map also provides a fascinating snapshot of Philippine life before the 18th century. It carefully charted the country's coastlines, mountains, rivers and seas, settlements and territories. During the 2016 arbitration case, the Philippines presented around 100 historical maps to the tribunal. But the Murillo Velarde map stood out as the most compelling piece of evidence. None of the ancient maps from China, or even Vietnam, showed Scarborough Shoal as part of their territory. In fact, Chinese maps from as early as 1098 to 1100 during the Tang Dynasty, all the way to the end of the Qing Dynasty in 1912, consistently marked Hainan Island as China's southernmost boundary. Scarborough Shoal simply did not appear on them. Meanwhile, the Murillo Velarde map prominently displayed the shoal and even carried the royal coat of arms of Spain, confirming it as an official government-commissioned map of Philippine territory. This absence of Scarborough Shoal on Chinese maps became a critical point during the arbitration hearings. It challenged China's claim that its presence in the South China Sea was purely historical. By contrast, the Velarde map provided documented evidence that the shoal was recognized as part of Philippine territory centuries earlier. In many ways, this centuries-old document helped weaken the narrative behind the 9-dash line and reinforce the Philippines' legal case. And in the end, the mother of all Philippine maps became more than just a historical artifact. It became one of the strongest pieces of evidence behind the Philippines' landmark legal victory, and a powerful reminder that sometimes history itself becomes a nation's most powerful defense. For decades, several Chinese scholars and analysts have argued that China's connection to the South China Sea stretches back more than 2,000 years. According to this view, sailors during the Han Dynasty were the first to discover the islands scattered across these waters. Chinese historical accounts say that by the 3rd century AD, diplomatic missions traveling to Cambodia recorded sightings of what we now know as the Paracel Islands and the Spratly Islands. Later, during the Song Dynasty and Yuan Dynasty, roughly between the 10th and 14th centuries, Chinese writings described the South China Sea as falling within China's sphere of influence. To support its territorial claims today, China points to a wide range of historical materials, ancient documents, archaeological discoveries, and records of Chinese navigation that span centuries. At first glance, this evidence might seem convincing. If you assume China's sovereignty first, the historical records can appear to reinforce that claim. But many historians and legal experts strongly disagree. Critics argue that the historical narrative leaves out a crucial detail: actual control. There is little solid evidence showing that China exercised real authority over the South China Sea after the mid-17th century. In fact, after a remarkable period of maritime exploration during the Ming Dynasty, 1368 to 1644, Chinese emperors gradually turned inward. The empire restricted overseas travel and largely withdrew from seafaring expansion. As a result, historical maps and records from later centuries offer very little proof that China governed or administered the region. Another challenge to China's argument lies in the nature of the islands themselves. Many of the features scattered across the South China Sea are tiny, remote, and barely above water. For centuries, most had no permanent population and little documented activity. This makes it extremely difficult to prove continuous occupation or governance by any single nation. Perhaps the most striking counter-argument comes from China's own historical maps. Several ancient Chinese maps, some dating back 900 years, including those from the Tang Dynasty and Song Dynasty, consistently show Hainan Island as the southernmost boundary of Chinese territory. Even the 1947 Constitution of the Republic of China identified Hainan as the country's southern limit. This raises an important question. If Hainan marked China's southern border for centuries, where did the later claim over most of the South China Sea come from? China's modern argument blends ancient history with post-World War II agreements. Beijing often cites the Cairo Declaration of 1943 and the Potsdam Proclamation of 1945. These statements required Japan to return territories it had seized during the war. After Japan's defeat in World War II, China regained several areas, including Taiwan, the Penghu Islands, and island groups known in Chinese as the Shisha Islands and Nansha Islands. But here's the key point. None of those agreements explicitly granted China ownership of the entire South China Sea. That issue eventually reached an international courtroom. In 2016, a tribunal established under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea issued a landmark ruling in the South China Sea arbitration. the decision concluded that China's sweeping historical rights claims in the disputed waters had no legal basis under international law. For supporters of the ruling, it marked a defining moment in the dispute. For China, which rejected the decision, the debate over history, sovereignty, and maritime power in the South China Sea continues to this day. And that's why these scattered reefs and tiny islands, barely visible on a map, remain at the center of one of the most consequential geopolitical conflicts of the modern era.